In tonight's main point, reparations for Black Californians. An 1,100-page report 2 years in the making is released. Are these recommendations realistic, and what happens now? The U.S. Supreme Court guts affirmative action in college admissions. Why that means something a little bit different for the Golden State. And the heat is here, what you need to know heading into the holiday weekend. Let's get to the point.
Welcome in. Thanks for joining us. We are following two major moments in our state and our country today. Affirmative action is gutted, and California is paving the way, becoming the first state to tackle reparations for Black residents. So in tonight's main point, we're looking at the historic report and adding context. Like, what does the path for reparations look like? Is it realistic in California? And what happens next? So here's a brief look at the report. It proposes more than 100 policies on how Black Californians could receive monetary compensation or other forms of reparations. If approved, those who would be first in line for compensation are people whose ancestors were enslaved or a free Black person living in the U.S. prior to 1900. Reparations could total to at least $1 million per person. That is just a rough estimate, though, and lawmakers, they would need to decide on that. Here's Becca Hobegger with more on tonight's main point.
Some 300 people gathered at the March Fong Yu Secretary of State building here in downtown Sacramento to witness history as members of the California Reparations Task Force presented their final report and recommendations to state lawmakers and the public.
That includes over 115 different reparations recommendations.
The day started with a news conference with members of the California Reparations Task Force and Secretary of State Shirley Weber, who, while an assembly member in 2020, authored the bill that formed this task force.
When I was writing it, people said, California? Why California? And the issue often is why not? Because slavery in this nation went across the entire nation. People didn't just remain in the South. Reparations is due whether you're in Mississippi or you're in California.
They also noted the morning's U.S. Supreme Court decision, which guts affirmative action by banning the consideration of race in college admissions.
First, they used race to exclude us. And now they're refusing to use race to include us.
As for how the Supreme Court decision impacts their report, Task Force Chair Camilla Moore pointed out,
one of the recommendations is to provide free college tuition at public colleges and universities for descendants of slaves. Not for all Black people, but for descendants of slaves. So to that end, that recommendation remains unaffected by SCOTUS's decision today because it's not a race-based admissions preference.
In general, the task force decided eligibility for reparations should be based on lineage determined by an individual being a Black descendant of a chattel enslaved person or a descendant of a free Black person living in the United States prior to the end of the 19th century.
What do we want? When?
In a packed auditorium, the task force held its final meeting, which included reflections from members on their 2 years of work, with 16 hearings gathering input from Black Californians about the long-lasting harms of slavery in America.
Chattel slavery, sharecropping, convict leasing, de jure and de facto segregation, redlining, educational funding discrepancies, predatory financial practices, unfair labor practices, chronic unemployment, medical experimentation,
and so much more, with proof, they say, compiled in this 1,100-page report, which is online now for anyone to read.
It answers every question. It leaves no one to wonder why we need to have reparations.
As for what comes next,
now that the final report is completed, our recommendations must be considered by the legislature, as I stated. As a member of the California State Senate, it will be up to me and my colleagues to begin the hard work of turning this into policy that we can implement.
Senator Stephen Bradford and Assemblymember Reggie Jones-Sawyer are the two state lawmakers on the task force who plan on turning this report into legislation.
Next year, we're going to move with legislative and budget ideas to make it happen.
You can check out that full report. It's broken down by chapters. There's also an executive summary. We have a link on abc10.com/links.
And again, the task force brought forward recommendations. This is not the final say. And reparations means something different to different people. So coming up around 6:45, we're introducing you to families who are trying to get what they believe is their family's land back from the state. Becca Hobegger has been following this topic for years. We'll have her report coming up at about 6:45. Today at the Supreme Court, the conservatives on the court ruled that affirmative action violates the 14th Amendment. The court heard two cases challenging the admissions policies of Harvard and the University of North Carolina. It effectively upends the use of race as a factor in college admissions in order to achieve diversity on college campuses. The court did find race could be used as part of an admissions essay, but those essays cannot be used to circumvent what the court just ruled. And today's ruling means something a little bit different here in California. Since 1996, public colleges and universities in our state have been prohibited from discriminating against or granting preferential treatment to a person based on their race or gender following the passage of Prop 209. Here's what Black Students of California United has to say.
Because of the affirmative action ban, it makes it a little bit difficult for our campuses to reflect the diversity of California as a whole.
UC Davis Chancellor Gary S. May is concerned about today's decision, saying in part, "I worry that underrepresented students of color and women will find more challenges and obstacles on their way to fields like mine, engineering, and in other science and technology fields." And all eyes will be on the U.S. Supreme Court tomorrow morning. It's their last day to release decisions before their summer recess. One thing we will be watching is for that decision on Biden's one-time student loan forgiveness plan. And back here in Northern California, 7,300 pounds of illegal fireworks were seized during a 6-week operation in San Joaquin County. The Sheriff's Office Illegal Firework Task Force says that 13 people were arrested and 3 were cited. The fireworks seized will be incinerated. The state assembly is about to get a new leader. Assembly member Robert Rivas from Hollister, California, will become speaker tomorrow. He's currently the chair of the Assembly's Agriculture Committee and told outgoing Speaker Anthony Rendon he had enough votes to replace him as Speaker. Political reporter Morgan Reiner spoke to Rendon earlier today.
Was the last year bumpy? Yes. Was it bumpier than I think it needed to be? Yes. But we are where we are, and I'm comfortable with it.
What's next for you?
I'm going to be an assembly member starting tomorrow. Tremendous amount of needs in the district, disadvantaged communities throughout the district, so I'm really excited about it.
Rendon says there's a lot he didn't get to accomplish in his 7 years as the party's leader. You can find more from today's interview on abc10.com. Coming up, as it heats up, the wildfire risk grows. The new technology CAL FIRE is adding to its arsenal to take on fire season, including artificial intelligence.
Yeah, Alex, this heat is really going to be building and adding to the fire danger. We've got excessive heat warning in effect, heat advisory, a flood watch as well. We're breaking down the summer heat.
CAL FIRE and Governor Gavin Newsom spoke in Grass Valley today, saying that they are ready to take on peak wildfire season. Governor Newsom pointed out that this year the state is really exploring how innovations like artificial intelligence can help identify fire threats quicker and deploy resources smarter. CAL FIRE's fleet of Firehawks, those helicopters that can fly at night, has also expanded. And this year, fires could be more intense because of all that rain that we had. It helped grow more vegetation. And Monica, that fire threat will be here soon, especially with that warmer weather coming
Right,
too.
and that's really going to start to elevate things, particularly for the valley. You can see we're kind of getting into that very dry category right through the Central Valley, and that's because of some of those conditions that will be building over the holiday weekend with the heat. We've got our heat advisory in place all the way to the coast. You can see right along that I-80 line where we have access to just the slightest bit of breeze. It is going to take the edge off some of these extreme conditions where our excessive heat warning will be in play. Highs as high as 110. Now, we still have the flood risk for the Central Sierra. That will continue through Tuesday. Low-lying areas, some campgrounds dealing with the snow melt and the runoff with that. Highs for today, 100 for Marysville, 101 for Oroville. We were just below the 100-degree threshold for much of the rest of the valley, but it is on the way. Air quality also becomes a bit of a concern with unhealthy for sensitive groups in Sacramento, Placer, and El Dorado counties, especially around any fireworks. We're going to have to deal with the smoke as well, just kind of settling into the valley. Morning lows start us off in the 60s. We're in the 90s as soon as noontime and getting into those 100s by 3 o'clock. That takes us through the early evening. Highs for tomorrow in the 80s for the Sierra, right around 90s to near 100 through much of the foothills. In fact, we're at about 107 to 108 for Oroville tomorrow. 60s along the coast, 103 for Vacaville, Rio Vista in the Delta at 102, 106 for Stockton, as well as Yuba City and Woodland, Colusa 108, Manteca 106, and El Dorado Hills at 103. So escaping the heat is going to be pretty tough this week, and I'd say the coast is about the coolest place we're going to see. And then moving on to our 10-day forecast, we get a bit of relief early next week, and that gets us right into the 4th of July holiday with highs in the 90s.
The state allegedly took property from local black families. Now their relatives are fighting to reclaim what they say is theirs. That's coming up after the break. Welcome back. Reparations can mean many different things to people. So following today's release of the California Reparations Task Force report, we wanted to highlight an ongoing battle over eminent domain. Local families are fighting to get property back that they believe was taken by the state. Our Becca Habegger highlights the efforts to reclaim what they say is theirs.
My Uncle Marion, he loved this place.
For Jonathan Burgess, a trip to Marshall Gold Discovery State Historic Park in Coloma is a return to what was once family land.
It looks like he's shadowboxing, right? And looks like he's barefooted, or, you know, maybe we just went for a swim.
Burgess, who traces his California roots back more than 170 years, is on a journey of discovery, one that is bittersweet.
I didn't have this picture the last time I was at the park. I would guess that he would look to be somewhere in this area. It's just surreal. Interesting.
His great-grandfather, Rufus Burgess, was brought to California as a slave around 1850 at the time of the gold rush. He became free soon after, took up gold mining, and bought land in Coloma, the family planting and farming fruit trees and opening a blacksmith shop.
Pretty emotional to be here.
Burgess is digging up the photos and documents to prove what in the park was once family land, and that the state of California took it from them through what he says was an unfair process.
This is one of those situations where this should still be our land.
In the late 1940s, California acquired some of the family property, Burgess says, and our research shows, through a process called eminent domain. That's when a government condemns private property and takes it for public use, such as for highways, airports, and schools. In this case, for Marshall Gold Discovery State Historic Park.
Yeah, it looks viable with houses and a resort across the way, so I don't know what was really condemned.
Eminent domain is essentially a sale forced by the government, and landowners are supposed to be paid fair market value. It's actually in the United States Bill of Rights. The Fifth Amendment of the Constitution says private property cannot be taken for public use without just compensation. But Burgess says his family was undercompensated and ultimately had no say in the process. For example, in the years leading up to the 100th anniversary of the gold rush, state officials were in a land rush, passing laws and urgency measures allowing the State Park Commission to more easily and quickly acquire property through eminent domain. A July 1947 memo from the Deputy Attorney General to the governor said,
"The spot is of historical interest and immediate acquisition is necessary, and that it will play a major part in the 1948 and 1949 centennial celebration."
Months later, the state started the process of taking 4 parcels of land in Coloma from 2 black families, ultimately paying just under $10,000 to be split among 6 people in this forced sale. And this is just one example.
True history needs to be told, no matter how uncomfortable it is.
Dawn Bassiano is the great-granddaughter of Pearlie Monroe, among the black landowners forced to sell their property to the state.
He went to court and was adamant about keeping what was his. And in the end, the state won.
I'm just a volunteer researcher helping Dawn.
Jeff Lee lives in Coloma and does volunteer research for the state park here and for people like Bassiano exploring their family history. He says Pearlie Monroe owned several hundred acres of land throughout Coloma and beyond. Much of it the state took through eminent domain.
Pearlie was never, ever, ever able to get back what he lost. That generational wealth was non-existent. There was nothing there to pass on or to pass forward because much of it had been taken by the state of California.
That's after he and other black families had contributed to Coloma during the gold rush and in the following decades.
There were blacksmiths, there was barbers, there were people that owned bathhouses, and then people that did cleaning and cooking for other miners and themselves. So a lot of them became farmers, they became ranchers.
It's important for kids, especially little black children, to know their history, how much they had an influence out here, what they've done.
Some new signs installed in the park in the last year help teach that history.
One of the asks from Jonathan was like, could you please recognize those properties that may not be recognized? And I thought, fantastic idea. So we've come up with several of these signs.
Barry Smith is the state park's Goldfields district superintendent. He says these signs came from conversations with Burgess and Bassiano, who want to see their family stories better told here.
This is you.
We were with Bassiano in May as she saw her family sign for the first time.
Andrew's son Pearlie later bought plots of land to preserve the gold rush history of Coloma. Wow. The state of California then bought the land that became this state park. Wow.
Pretty good.
Yes. They didn't go into the details, but at least, you know, it's a start, right?
They say it starts with this, telling the true story. But then when it comes to righting past wrongs, they say that could look like giving back some of the land or paying for the land that was taken unfairly.
If the state came in and took land through eminent domain, if you can, give it back or fairly and justly compensate those families.
Burgess and Bassiano have a rock to stand on thanks to a recent win by another black California family. Last year, Governor Newsom signed a law allowing Los Angeles County to transfer land back to the descendants of Willa and Charles Bruce, an African-American couple who opened a Southern California beach resort for black families in the early 1900s, at a time when racial segregation barred them from many beaches. The Bruces withstood threats from white neighbors and even the KKK, but in 1924, the city of Manhattan Beach took the land through eminent domain, saying it planned on building a park, though that didn't happen for decades. The land ownership eventually transferred to the county, and nearly a century later, just this July, after much advocacy and that change in state law, LA County returned the land to the couple's heirs.
It's not a one-size-fits-all model at all.
I spoke with Kavon Ward, who led the Justice for Bruce's Beach organization.
One of the most important parts of our advocacy, is where we start actually, is informing the public of what's happened. Before we do any call to actions, we over-inform.
She has now launched an organization called Where Is My Land, along with activist Ashanti Martin.
And find and help black families who lost land or had land stolen because of their race, just like Willa and Charles Bruce did.
And the building there...
They're working with Jonathan Burgess as he works to reclaim the land in Coloma. We asked Barry Smith about this goal.
That would be unfair to say, because I don't know. That's at a much higher level. What I can help somebody with is if there's a story that needs to be told or would like to be told, I have no problem listening to that and coming up with a solution and maybe expanding those stories. But I can't speak upon the potential reparations or his ask of that. That's beyond my scope.
A lot of the things are outside of the individuals that work inside the state parks, their hands. They don't have the control that they need to make those big, wide sweeping changes and decisions. So it has to come from, folks higher up.
They're calling on state leaders, and Burgess is clear he does not want to displace anyone.
If anybody were to want to uproot somebody, that means we haven't learned and we haven't gotten better, and so I think we are better. But in areas where there's nothing being done and it clearly should be returned, I want those people to be in support of that and say, yeah, we should be returning it.
An opportunity to rebuild family and regional wealth.
Anything that we put here, like a bed and breakfast or a barbecue shop, would bring value not only to the park, but to the region.
In a place where he says that opportunity was taken from them.
It could be a part of the local economy. Who knows, the House of Burgess's restaurant, bed and breakfast, tell the story. Yeah.
And to learn more about this land and read the longer statement from the state's park about Coloma and the changes that they've made, we have more information on abc10.com/tothepoint. Still ahead, a new cherry blossom park in the making right here in Sacramento. They just announced the details. We'll let you take a look at it coming up after the break. Take a look at this. Today, Sacramento's Mayor, Congresswoman Doris Matsui, and the Sacramento Tree Foundation and many more broke ground on a new cherry blossom park. It's a first for Sacramento. We are told that $7.6 million was raised to build this, and it will have a mixture of nature, art, and culture along the Sacramento River. It's right next to the new Science Museum just north of Old Sacramento. All right, coming up tomorrow on To The Point, it's the last day of June, and we are continuing to celebrate all things Pride. Pride Month was born out of the Stonewall Uprising when it was illegal to be gay. Pride has become a celebration of all things the LGBTQ community never had, and some feel that this year it's more important than ever to celebrate.
No hate crime, no hate group, no anything can take away the love that I have for my art form, the love that I have for my community. Nothing will ever take that away from me. So that's what keeps me going.
We are sharing authentic stories from our local LGBTQIA+ community. That is all coming up tomorrow right here at 6:30 on To The Point. And you might recognize her. Take a look at your screen. ABC 10 anchor Laura Painter is singing the national anthem at the River Cats game tonight at Sutter Health Park in West Sacramento. Some of us here at ABC 10 just found out that Laura sings, so you can catch more of her performance coming up tonight at 11. Have a great night. I'll see you tomorrow. Hey, it's Alex. Just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. I really love hearing from everyone, and I hope that you'll stay in touch. Reach out to me on Facebook at AlexBellTV, or you can email me at tothepoint@abc10.com, or you can even send me a text message at 916-321-3310.